John Nosta, fundador de Nosta Lab y una de las voces más influyentes en la transformación digital de la salud, teórico de la innovación y filósofo de la tecnología, nos invita a entender los cambios exponenciales de la inteligencia artificial y su impacto en el potencial humano de la medicina.
Okay. Buenas tardes. Only 2 words in Spanish for me. Hello? Check 1, 2. Can you hear me? Okay. Technology. Always trouble. How's everybody doing, okay? Good? I see some hands. Okay, good. I think it's working. I have a lot to say today. I'm going to start off with 2 ideas. 2 ideas that I think are at the heart of what's going on in the world today. 2 ideas that impact us, but also impact education. And the first one is augmented intelligence. Augmented intelligence, or iterative intelligence. This is the new way of learning that I think is going to transform the world. But iterative intelligence has another component, another side to the coin, and that's cognitive surrender. Cognitive surrender. Is technology thinking for us? Have we decided that, well, technology might be smarter and that maybe we don't have to think? We don't have to think. And what is the world like in a place where we don't think, where we cognitively surrender to artificial intelligence? This is 2 sides of the same coin, and I want to start off by talking about the nature of artificial intelligence and the nature of large language models. We spend a lot of time talking about large language models and asking the question, is it smarter than we are? Is it smarter than we are? And we often measure that on an axis, on a scale, on the x-axis, if you will. Maybe IQ is an example. We take our IQ, and then we do a test with a large language model and see what that IQ is. I think that's completely wrong. I think we have to understand that artificial intelligence is completely different than human intelligence. And that's very, very important in the context of the life we live, but also when we practice medicine, when we teach medicine. We have to understand that I believe these 2 things are different. So you'll find me saying computation, artificial computation, and human cognition. See, 2 palabras, but very different. Computation versus cognition. So I want to start off and talk about, how does an LLM think? How does it think? What does it mean when we say apple? For you and me, when we talk about an apple, we talk about 3 dimensions. ¿Verdad? See, I need to see some heads shaking, right? 3 dimensions: height, width, and length. That's what an apple exists to us. We also relate apple to language. For example, Apple computer. Or an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Or other associations. These are important because this is the way we think of an apple. We think of an apple in the context of what I call lived experience, the experience of our lives. So how does a large language model think about an apple? Does anybody even know? Can you understand that when you type in apple into a large language model, what happens? There's a lot of technology that happens. The word becomes a vector. The vector goes into a hyperdimensional system. But that's not the important part. The word apple lives in a hyperdimensional reality. Now, I hope you're getting a little confused because that's the whole idea. When you type in apple, apple becomes a token and then lives in this vector, this dimension, it lives in a space of 12,288 dimensions. Think about that for a second. 12,288 dimensions. That should make no sense to you. That's very, very important because that's the computational dynamics of large language models. The computational dynamics. In fact, the models today actually live in 25,000 dimensions. We don't understand that. Human minds don't understand it. So stop trying. Recognize that AI is fundamentally different than human cognition. If we want to think about 5 dimensions, we can create something called a hypercube. Look it up. It's a very interesting square with a square inside. It tries to create this 5-dimensional reality. If we really want to push on the bounds of human thought, we can start talking about the physics theory called string theory. Many of you might have heard of string theory, the theory of the origins of the universe. Very, very complicated and difficult. To make string theory work, to push the bounds of human thought, it needs 11 dimensions. 11. And physicists freak out when they try to do that. It's very, very complicated, very, very difficult. So I just want you to recognize that the nature of what a computer is doing, what a large language model is doing, is very, very different. And I want to take you on a journey today about what's going on in the world and how things are changing, how they're going fast, how they're going slow, some of the good news and some of the bad news about large language models and how they're completely changing the world. So I want to start off with this slide because it's what everyone talks about. This is the exponential curve. Has anyone ever heard of this? Have you ever seen of this rapid change? The exponential curve is the way people talk about the way technology changes, impacts the world, impacts society. From the printing press to the telescope to the telephone all the way up. This is wrong. This is already done. This is already over. The world is no longer changing in an exponential way. The rate of change is even faster than this. Faster than this. In fact, if you look at the introduction of ChatGPT a few years ago, the introduction went straight up. Straight up. What does that even mean, it goes straight up? To those of you who study math, it means that there's a 0 in the denominator of the math. It means that the equation blows up. So what we're seeing today is this rapid change that is faster than expected. Now, we're even hearing new language for this kind of change. A very famous investor in the United States named Cathie Wood calls it super exponential growth or hyper exponential growth. And if we look at some of the data, we could actually see that early on, we had handwriting recognition. And if you look at this slide, you can even see it has a bit of an exponential curve starting in 1999. But look what's happening here. The change is going straight up. The rate of change is startling. The rate of change is confusing. The rate of change is problematic. Speed in medicine is our best friend and our biggest enemy. The rapid decompensation of a patient is a real problem. But if we can drive clinical action quickly, we can change it. So the 2 points here that are very, very important is, one, is we no longer think of it as exponential growth. In math, we write e to the x, or x squared, right? Those are exponential functions or curves. This is the way I want you to think about it. In today's world, it's actually AI to the power of AI. ¿Verdad? See? Got it? It's AI talking to AI. AI to the power of AI, and that's what's changing the world so quickly. And we're seeing words like superhuman appearing in the scientific literature. I see Elsevier and Elsevier, some of the medical publications out in the exhibition hall. This word, superhuman, was not my word. It's not the word from the TV show. It was the word that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So we're seeing the New England Journal of Medicine talking about computers, AI, LLMs, as superhuman. Que increíble, see? It's amazing, absolutely amazing. And when we take a look at this, we're seeing that across a variety of areas in medicine, this is coming true. These are 2 basic data sets. This is a person in the emergency room with a little bit of clinical data. And when we look at the triage of that, physicians don't do as well as AI in finding out what the differential diagnosis. When the patient is admitted to the hospital and there's a larger body of data, AI still does better than the physician. So what we're seeing is in these two data sets, artificial intelligence, mostly large language models, are providing added information, added thinking power to AI in the clinical process. This is a difficult slide. Take a breath, because it's very easy. But I want you to look at three interesting numbers here. The interesting number here is when doctors work alone, when clinicians work with AI, and when AI works by itself. Do they get the right answer, the right diagnosis? And if you look up top, the correct final diagnosis was 62%, 62%, and 66%. It was the same. That's important to recognize that physicians alone, physicians with AI, and AI by itself got the right diagnosis. Why? Well, because when they looked at a clinical scenario, like a 66-year-old man comes into the emergency room with chest pain, he's sweaty. What's the diagnosis? Probably a heart attack, right? That's not a cognitive diagnosis. It's not a thinking diagnosis. It's actually a visceral or gut diagnosis. But let's look a little deeper at this data, and this is the fascinating thing. This is where computers and AI will be very, very powerful in medicine. The diagnostic reasoning score. The question is not, does the patient have a heart attack? The question is, how did you come to that conclusion? So the patient had an ST segment elevation on their EKG. Great, that's fine. Everybody knows what a STEMI heart attack is, the ST segment. But I see some heads nodding. Thank you for nodding. Could you tell me the 5 reasons for ST segment elevation? Yeah, what are the 5 reasons why ST segments can be elevated? But there's more. Pericarditis, right? Early repolarization, old ventricular aneurysm, Prinzmetal or spasm, as well as a traditional STEMI heart attack. So the clinical reasoning score for AI was, what was it, 92? It was 73 for physicians. It was 76 for doctors who used AI. But when AI was alone, it got a 92, it got an A. It got an A on the exam because it looks at a sense of clinical reasoning. This is important to recognize. This is the difference. The difference is that AI is a computational tool. When my wife comes home from the pediatrician, I have one question I ask her. I used to ask her, no more. I said, what did the doctor say? What did the doctor say? And I waited for the answer. In today's world, when my wife comes home from the pediatrician, I say, what did the computer say? Pero hay más palabras, okay? There's more. That's a comma. What did the computer say, and what did the doctor do? That's the connection. That's the important part, because I'm going to argue a little bit more that AI and human cognition are completely different animals. They're very, very different, and they work very, very well together. So let's talk a little bit about education. This is one of my favorite slides. I love this slide, and I hate this slide. It looked at students, not medical students, not residents or interns, but elementary students studying math. And they used a large language model, and they did a 2-year curriculum in 6 weeks. 2 years in 6 weeks. That's fascinating. 2 years in 6 weeks. Think about those people who took neuroanatomy in medical school. It's a 1-month class. It's horrible. It's so difficult. But this is an opportunity where we can advance education. I'm going to get more specific about this. This is both good and bad. The speed of learning is not something we always want. When I read Gabriel Garcia Marquez' Love in the Time of Cholera or 100 Years of Solitude, I don't want to read them fast. I want to read them slow. I want to get from point A to point B. I want to start the book and I want to finish the book. But I don't want to do it fast. I want to enjoy it. I want to struggle. I want to laugh. I want to cry. I want to experience it. I want to live that experience. Artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, gets us from A to B very quickly, sometimes too quickly, because the distance between point A and point B is where imagination lives. It's where we live. It's where humans live. So I think we have to recognize that this is very interesting. Speed of learning is a powerful tool, and it's sometimes important. Now, here's another study with similar kids a little bit older, and they let them use AI for their homework. And of course, did they do better? Yes, they did better because they had AI to support their endeavor, and they did 40% better. Then they had a surprise quiz. And what happened? It went down 17%. They didn't do as well when they took the AI away. This is very, very interesting. When I was in school, and I hope people in the room can relate to this, if I did my math homework, okay, if I did all my math homework and I got all my problems right, if I had a quiz the next day, did I do well or not? Yeah. I probably got an A on the quiz because I did the homework. These students didn't get an A on the quiz. In fact, they went down. Why? Because they went from point A to point B with nothing in the middle. They didn't have the structured learning that AI offers. We already know that AI is a good tool, but you have to incorporate AI into your learning dynamics. We often think that AI makes you learn faster. I don't know. I think sometimes AI makes you learn slower because you have to ask questions, you have to interrogate, you have to go back and forth, you have to discuss what is early repolarization on an EKG, what is spasm, what is STEMI, what are these things? It's a slower process, but it's much more of a richer and dynamic process. So AI helps, but AI hurts. It depends how you use it. This is a very interesting study of physicians who did colonoscopies. And the blue is the baseline. They started at a percentage score of about 28%. Then they gave them AI. AI is an image recognition tool mostly. And they did better. Then they had them do it again without the AI. And what happened? Why didn't they just return to where they were? This was their skill set right here. They were at 28. They used AI. They went up. I agree. Then they turned the AI off. And what happened? Why don't they go back to where they were, to baseline, right? They didn't. They got worse. They got worse. And an interesting side observation is here. They thought they got better. They thought they got better. This is AI rebound. This is in medicine, but it's in life, anywhere. Someone who drives a Tesla with full self-driving, with all the computer augmentation, then they get into their old car, they often drive worse. So this is something that we have to recognize, that AI rebound happens in clinical medicine all the time. They give you a sense of confidence when the reality is you're actually worse than baseline. And in medicine, we know sometimes hospitals have computer-augmented technology for colonoscopy. Many of them don't. But when you jump back and forth, when you drive a Ford, and then you drive a Tesla, and you go back and forth, your driving skill set varies. And I think this is a very, very important issue. Now, there are three things that I want to talk about as to why this is important in the context of education. The first one always gets me in trouble. Knowledge is dead. Knowledge is dead. Today, the textbook is a static map of education. It was written how many years ago? I'm using a lot of cardiology. Anybody know Eugene Braunwald's Cardiovascular Medicine? A big red book, very famous cardiology book. That was written many, many years ago. It's a static map. But what's happening today is that knowledge is arriving as you need it. So if I want to learn how to cook a souffle, a French souffle, I can go to the famous cookbook by Julia Child, The Art of French Cooking, right? I see page 57. It's on page 57. Go look. So I open the book and I see page 57. First thing it says is make a sachet. I don't even know what a sachet is. That book was not written for me. How can I learn when that book was not written for me? But what we're seeing with AI is that I could create the instructions to make guacamole or a French souffle, or whatever I want to do, and I can have it do it in Spanish, do it in English, make it funny, use automotive analogies to teach me how to cook, and recognize that I've never been in a kitchen before. There I have it. Now, where did this book of knowledge exist before I created it? Nowhere. Nowhere. You created it through your prompting. Voltaire, the French philosopher, said, you don't judge a person by their answers, you judge a person by the questions they ask. So knowledge is being redefined. If I need to learn what pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is, or if I need to know some sort of anatomical physiology, McBurney's point in the abdomen for a hot appendix, I can learn that in a way that's tuned to the creative frequency of my brain. How many people here have had a favorite teacher? Anybody? Many, right? But how many favorite teachers have you had? One or two, right? One of those. Very rare that you've had 3 or 4 or 5. Why is that? That's so strange. It's because that teacher got you. That teacher understood how you learned. She, oftentimes it's a woman, knows that she likes to give you a little extra time, or she likes to make it a little bit fun, or she likes to have you do the problem on the blackboard in front of the class. Whatever it is, that's a learning style. That is reproduced today in the context of large language models. It's something that's tuned to the creative frequency of your brain. That's important. Knowledge as we know it is no longer the way we understand. It's no longer a fixed map. It's a dynamic web that is created for you in your context, any time of the day, any learning level. That's, I think, one of the greatest things about artificial intelligence. Now, the second part is that we have this idea of iterative intelligence. Iterative intelligence. Intelligence no longer exists as just reciting facts. It's the engagement back and forth between student and teacher. Student and teacher. Iteration. Well, that's nothing new. That's Socrates. That's the Socratic dialogue, where the teacher asks a question, gets an answer, asks another question. That's not new. It's old. You know where else also iterative intelligence lives? At the bedside of the patient, in the hallway, when a group of doctors and nurses and technicians are walking during rounds, and you're asking questions back and forth. This is iterative intelligence. What we're seeing now is a technological version of iterative intelligence. And that back and forth redefines the concept of learning. That's one of the most powerful learning tools. So one, knowledge as we understand it is dead. Makes people a little nervous, but I do believe that the way we receive knowledge is in the concept of dynamic webs. Number 2, intelligence is defined by iteration, back and forth, this conversation we have. And finally, the third point that's important here, and this comes out of what I've heard in pharmaceuticals all the time. Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Novartis, companies like that, they always say the CEO comes to the podium and says, everything we do for the patient, right? Patient centricity. Now, where does that come from? That comes from Apple. It comes from Amazon, customer centricity, right? We put the customer at the center. And oftentimes we do put the patient at the center of care, but now we're seeing something new. We're seeing the learner at the center of the dynamic, learner centricity. And this is where we're shifting from those static models into a dynamic model where I am at the center. So if I'm a nurse and I need to understand what pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is with a Swan-Ganz catheter, my goodness, it's very difficult. But I can learn it on very, very fundamental terms. I may want to even learn what pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is in the context of cooking. That knowledge has never existed before, but this idea of putting me at the center is extraordinarily powerful, not just for students, not just for doctors, for chiefs of staff, for patients. Patients, this is a very, very interesting one, because using a large language model to create learner centricity that's defined by iterative intelligence makes us all LLLs. Not LLMs, LLLs. Anybody want to guess? Lifelong learners. Lifelong learners. That's the essence of medicine today. You want to be a good doctor, you want to be a good nurse, you want to be a good pharmacist, you have to stay ahead of the curve. You have to learn. And learning is difficult. But by leveraging these tools, it helps the process along. So those are kind of the 3 fundamental aspects of what I think AI brings to medical school, to learning, to teaching. Now, everybody talks about faster and better, faster and better, faster and better, right? AI lets you do something faster and probably better. Let's say a discharge summary for a patient. I can write it. It's probably pretty good. It's better because I can get all the new meds and all the new labs and put it into my discharge summary. So that's great. People are missing out that there's a third element here that I think is very, very important. You enjoy the process. It's fun. Why do people go into medicine? To help people. How do you feel when you help people? Well, sometimes you feel smart, but sometimes there's the joy of medicine, rediscovering the joy of learning. Because that joy of learning, the joy of discovery, maybe if it's the joy of a bit of a failure, the joy of the aha moment, the joy of getting the diagnosis right, the joy of saving a life, is the journey that lives between A and B. LLMs, AI, makes that journey very quick. You get from A to B very quickly, but the lived experience, the clinical experience, the human experience, not the human computational experience, the human cognitive experience that is augmented by AI's computational experience, that's a game changer. We know now in medicine, many doctors would tell their children not to go to medical school. It's not that interesting, it's hard, it's not a good life. You're driven by the technology. The technology is your master. Well, I think today we're seeing that that's going to change a little bit. So technology helps us rediscover not just the joy of medicine, not just the joy of taking care of patients, but it's the joy of learning. Learning. That is the essence of humanity. That's why I started off with two phrases. Do you remember them? Iterative intelligence, that wonderful dynamic, like the Socratic dialogue, like rounds in the hallway, stands in dramatic counterpoint to cognitive surrender. And when we say cognitive surrender, it's like we're giving up on our life, on our humanity. That's very, very difficult and very important. Now, always a but. There's some good news and some bad news. I believe, and this is my theory, that AI is anti-intelligent. It's anti-intelligent. It's not artificial intelligence. It lives at right angles. At right angles. Human cognition is on the x-axis, and we have human cognition and computational on the y. And what we see is humans are autobiographical. We live in time. We live in time. We live as the development of our lives. We are built on yesterday. Our yesterday's experience as a clinician, as a husband, as a wife, as a father, as a human is very, very important. Now, large language models are completely opposite. They're pattern-based. They live in this dimensional reality. Remember, 12,288 dimensions? They live in this atemporal reality that's different. When we recognize that AI is different from human computation and intelligence, we don't have to strive to be smarter than AI. We have to recognize that AI is different. Okay, can we do a group experiment now? All right, keep everybody involved. Put one hand over one eye. What happens? What happens to our field of vision? Anybody want to yell it out? We lose our depth perception. That's called parallax view. If you're ever in the emergency room or in an office and you put a gauze over someone's eye because they have a scratched cornea and you send them home, make sure you tell them they may not be a good driver because they lose depth perception. That's called parallax view. Parallax view. We see the world through two visual fields. Maybe AI is a bit like that. The tremendous, outstanding, brilliant cognitive capability of AI is one perspective. The rich, lived experience of human cognition is another perspective. Together, 1 + 1 = 3. It's better than the sum of the parts. So I think we struggle with saying, are we smarter than AI? Is AI smarter than us? It's not it's the wrong question. Don't even go to the answer. AI is fundamentally different. And in fact, if you look at that sort of cognitive inversion, AI is sort of upside down. It's sort of backwards. Human cognition has a low fluency. It has high cognitive friction. We struggle to get to the answer. The friction is called life. That process of getting to the answer, of working hard, of that aha moment, is very, very powerful, and it's bound by memory. It's time dependent. It's error prone. We make errors. It's effortful understanding. It's meaning that's earned through cost, meaning that's earned through cost. AI is very, very different from this, and it's really the opposite of these things. I'm not going to go right through them, but AI is very fluent. We all know when we get an answer from ChatGPT, it is very coherent and fluid. It sounds really smart, doesn't it? It always tells me I'm really smart. Pursuant to the matter at hand, the reciprocal inverse of that computation may be best articulated if we look at it. I don't even know what they're talking about. It sounds smart as heck. That's part of the magic of LLMs. They put together words that have a sense of authority. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But they're not biological, not biographical. They'll tell you an error with the same enthusiasm as the truth. There is no difference. Is that mushroom poisonous? No. Oh, I'm sorry, I think it was poisonous. I'm sorry, you're dead. That's kind of the dynamic of a large language model. And the judgment is not formed, it's simulated. And what happens? We see lots of weird things going on here when this happens. We see what I call the faces of anti-intelligence. Number one is it's performative. It sounds really good. We all know people who have gotten an email from someone and it was written by AI. You almost don't like them. They're very smart, but very contrived. It's performative. The answer is so rich with language, but not with the lived experience. The second one is that it's compressed. It's compressed into answers that arrive fast, but there's nothing to support it. The answer is thin. The next one is that the agency is displaced. I know these are sort of abstract philosophical concepts, but the origin of thought shifts, but the ownership stays the same. Think about that for a second. That email that you wrote, that you used an LLM, that was written really smart and really brilliant, and might even said things that are new in the context of the dialogue. It wasn't written by you, but you still own it. So you still have that ownership of intellect. And then finally, you have a synthetic conviction. We believe that we are the origin of those thoughts. And that's very tricky in today's world. Now, to manage that, we have to recognize, we have to be aware, and recognize that there are capabilities and there are limitations to large language models. We have to understand that interrogation is part of the process. Asking questions and refining outputs, it's part of the iterative intelligence. We have to do that. We have to recognize that we need to calibrate this and assess and adjust AI's responses. AI is not right. They're oftentimes wrong, but when we leverage the human experience, we come up with a better solution. And we have to synthesize that into our reasoning. Recently, the Nobel Prize was awarded to Google that looked at protein folding. Some of you might know about protein folding. Protein folding is the way drugs are manufactured by biologics, big protein-based drugs. And the way they work is they have a structure, and then the structure folds. And that folding allows them to interact with receptor sites. So if it folds wrong, it doesn't fit into the receptor like a lock and key. So Google did protein folding on all known biologic proteins. And then through parallax insight, they had humans look at that information and created drugs based on that. So that was the synthesis, the combination of both human and AI. So what do you have to do? What do I tell my kids, my 14-year-old son and my 17-year-old daughters? I tell them to read. Read, right? Let the words find grounding. And write. Writing is important because we're deferring the cognitive capability by having AI write for us. That's not us writing. We have to make decisions. We have to say yes or no. We can't defer the decision to the technology, whether it's clinical medicine or a school paper. Argue with AI. AI is insidious. It seeks to make you happy and passive. You have to argue with it. And sometimes you have to stay with the problem. This is where working with AI doesn't make it quick. It makes it better. Stay with the problem, sit with the problem, think about the problem, interrogate the model. Now, that being said, I want to go through a few basic rules of innovation. How do we apply this? How do we make change as an educational system, in a hospital, in a medical environment? The first one is to recognize that that early curve that we were talking about, the exponential curve, that exponential curve is often compared with linear growth. We all love lines, right? Everybody know that a line is y equals ax squared plus b. Probably studied that in school a long, long time ago. That's a line. It has a slope. But then someone came along and said, what about y equals x squared? What happens when linear growth comes in? And the solution to that, any large language model would tell you the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. We need to know that. We need to feel that. I'm proud when I can articulate that because that's part of the journey, the cognitive journey that I've experienced. So the good news is that the trajectory is up. The bad news is oftentimes the early part of digital transformation, any kind of technological transformation, genomic typing for tumors, Fitbit data for cardiovascular disease, the early part of that transformation is below linear growth. We all love linear growth because it's easy. It has the same slope. So if I tell you that if you put $1,000 in your retirement account and you're 21 years old and you get 8% interest every year, you can calculate how much you have when you retire. It's predictable. For business, for different kinds of operations, if I knew I got 5% year on year, that's a very stable position to be. So oftentimes, this danger zone is problematic. I don't want to do it because if I go the old-fashioned way, it's more comfortable. And this is what really frightens me when I speak with clinicians. I talk to them about changing their modality, and they say something that just really frightens me. They say, it's not the way I was trained. It's not the way I was trained. Because in medicine, that's the way you practice. You practice how your teacher told you. And in today's world, we're seeing fundamental changes in learning, in the way we get to a differential diagnosis, the way we manage care plans. And that's very tricky. Now, this is interesting data, and I want to draw your attention to the bar on the bottom. Why don't we adopt technology? Because there's no plan. We say it works, it sounds great, it's sexy, it's interesting, but the lack of a unified strategy was cited in about one of three medical institutions. They said, okay, here's AI, here's an LLM, but there's no rollout, there's no plan. That's the trick. Not return on investment, not things that we would often say, the viability of investment. It's the strategic thinking behind it. And that's very, very important in today's world. The other side of this equation is if the nurses don't want it, the doctors aren't going to get it, right? In the hierarchy of the medical system, culture is very, very powerful. The way workflow unfolds. So if culture does embrace change, if culture does not embrace change, that's going to be very, very difficult. So you have to recognize that sometimes innovation is not top-down. Sometimes innovation is bottom-up. And that's an important differentiation. Now, sometimes great ideas don't even work, even though they're great ideas. This is a funny story. It's an interesting story about the QWERTY keyboard, the QWERT. Why are the letters QWERT on a typewriter? Does anybody know? It's kind of curious, right? It feels random. The reason is to slow people down. It was designed to slow you down because in the early days of the typewriter, some of you might remember the early typewriters. What happens if you type too fast? The keys stick. The keys stick. So this guy in 1932 named Dvorak said, I can do better. I can make a more ergonomically designed keyboard so you can type faster. It was a miserable failure. Miserable failure. It failed for two important reasons that are analogous to today's clinical world. Number one, it was expensive. In those days, you had to buy a new typewriter. $100 for a new Smith Corona typewriter. Not in 1932, that wasn't in my budget. We see that today in the hospital. Let's get that new CAT scanner, that 5 Tesla CAT scanner that's going to give us 20% better imaging. It only costs $10 million. Sorry. Innovation comes at a cost. But innovation also comes at a cognitive cost. What this new technology required to do was learn a new typing modality for your fingers. How many people here would be willing to learn a new typing flow for a 10, 15% increase in speed? Very few because we've learned that process. It's the same thing with medicine. We want physicians to learn new methodologies when they're used to a QWERTY keyboard. So the QWERTY keyboard is with us today, even though it's inefficient. And the new Dvorak keyboard, which you can purchase on Amazon if you'd like, it's available. The Dvorak keyboard is there, but it bombed. The other thing I find very interesting, going back about 10 years ago, I was really excited about telemedicine. What happened to telemedicine in Mexico? Boy, it was supposed to be like a great thing. Hector and I have had many conversations about there are not enough physicians, there are not enough specialists, there's not enough prenatal care. Boy, with telemedicine, we could have these patients doing really well. What happened? I don't know. I have a theory, but that's a whole nother talk. Telemedicine didn't click because of what Steve Jobs said a long, long time ago. I'm wearing my black t-shirt, so I have to have one Steve Jobs story. Steve Jobs said the early days of television was nothing more than a radio show with a TV camera. Nothing more than a radio show where they put a TV camera in front of it, and they called it television. Well, that's what telemedicine is. It's a Zoom call with your doctor. That's it. Is it linguistic analysis? Is it using the echo portable stethoscope that the patient can use to listen to breath sounds or to heart sounds? Is it using, is it using an EKG machine that costs $80 on Amazon that I carry around with me? Are we using that for telemedicine? Of course not. It's called AliveCore, a wonderful tool. I hold it, it syncs with my phone, and it takes my EKG so I can see a tachycardia. I can see atrial fibrillation. That's its really big use. Patients who have that irregular heartbeat that's associated with stroke. So did telemedicine do it? No, telemedicine took the radio show and put a TV camera in front of it, made a Zoom call. That's where telemedicine is. Sadly, we need telemedicine 2.0. And I think in places like Mexico, for example, I think telemedicine could be an extraordinarily powerful opportunity. So I want to end with a thought. We started with the cognitive age. What exactly is the cognitive age? Let's go back to Gutenberg. Everyone know Gutenberg? What did Gutenberg do? He invented the printing press. He made words portable. Now, interestingly, Gutenberg created a device for which there was no market. I'm going to say that again because it's kind of complicated. He invented a book when the world couldn't read. Well, that's that exponential curve, right? The early part of the curve. That was a problem. Nevertheless, what it did, it unlocked words. And that was a powerful transformation. That changed the world. Principally, then, it was a lot about the Bible. But Gutenberg unlocked words. And then a few hundred years later, what came along? This thing called the internet. And Google, because Google really defined the early days of the internet. What did the internet do? If Gutenberg unlocked words, what did the internet do? The internet unlocked facts. It unlocked facts. What's the mass of an electron? How much does the human heart weigh? What's the normal blah, blah, blah? We typed it in and we got an answer. We Googled it, right? We Googled it. But that was a very cold process. It was transactional. We asked a question, we got an answer, and we moved on. So we started with Gutenberg, who unlocked words. We came over to Google. Interesting G's, right? We came over to Google, and they unlocked facts in a cold-hearted transactional way. What did AI do? What are LLMs doing for you and me right now? They're unlocking thought. They're unlocking thought. That iterative dynamic, remember, iterative intelligence. Knowledge is dead. Learner centricity puts us at the center of the dynamic where we are sharing thoughts with a large language model. Some people often say that they're just a tool. It's just a tool, is how you use it. I'm not convinced it's just a tool, because when I'm done using a hammer or a screwdriver, I can put it down and walk away. But when I've used a large language model, can I unthink a thought I shared with the computer? These are very, very important problems, and there's a lot to discuss about driving people to do bad things, the use in psychotherapy. These models have intrinsic good and intrinsic bad. But that's where we are. We're at the cognitive age. And this fellow who said this quote, which is very interesting, his name is Alvin Toffler. He wrote the book called Future Shock in the 50s. In the 50s. He said the future illiterate of this generation aren't those who can't read or write. It's not about reading and writing. It will be those who cannot unlearn and relearn. Unlearn and relearn. Well, there's another word for that. It's called education. Unlearn and relearn. That's where medicine is. That's my biggest obstacle as a healthcare marketer. How do I get doctors to unlearn that the stethoscope is something that they can have in their pocket that's electronic? No, they'll only use their stethoscope that they wear like a prayer shawl, because we know the stethoscope's value is to identify the doctor in the room, not to listen to heart sounds. So that's our challenge today. Our challenge is to think differently. And on that note, I'm going to thank you. And I just want to reference one slide, if it's here. No, it's not here, so we're not going to do it. Tenemos tiempo para preguntas. Yes, no? No questions. All right. Oh, yeah, I see a hand. Yes, thank you for your participation. When I look and I see people smiling and engaged, it really means a lot to me as a speaker, so thank you very much for that. Yes, please. ¿Tenemos un poquito tiempo? Okay. How's my Spanish? Bien, sí. All right.
Hi, I'm Mariana. I'm from Santiago de Chile. I wanted to ask you, how do you think, and how or what strategy has been effective in your experience to help our teachers unlearn? Because we have many ideas, we have many strategies that we have planned, but we find it hard to make them unlearn, because to unlearn, I think you have to be very vulnerable.
It's a very complicated question, because teachers own the classroom. You know, doctors own the hospital. Nurses own the hospital, but doctors think they do. I think one way is to have the experience. You have to do it. You have to try it. In other words, you have to use a large language model to develop your lesson plan. Don't do it for education. Do it for maybe helping with generating interesting homework for the children, for the kids. But do it in a way that's really interesting. So I think that the experiential aspect of learning that's where you've got to do it. When I have people learning about artificial intelligence, I take them for a ride in a Tesla. I'm sorry? It's experiential. You have to live the experience. And I think that's a very, very powerful way of doing it. It's hard because the system has inertia, right? It's stuck. People think they're in the groove, but really they're in the rut. It's just a different word. It's a different perspective. So I think we have to. There's another thing. Everybody here talks about the art and science of medicine, right? The art and science. Why do they use dos palabras? Why not just the science of medicine? They use the art is because we make mistakes. We fail. When you make a bad outcome, when you pick the wrong drug, when the patient dies from the surgery, what do? Well, that's the art of medicine. It's not an exact science. Well, it's becoming an exact science. It's becoming an exact science because technology is helping us become better and better and better and better. So I think that's part of what's going to happen. AI is going to shine the light on the frailty of the doctor. How many people die in the United States every year from medical errors? I've heard this. I'm not sure it's true, but I'll give you the number that's in the literature. 250,000 people die every year from errors. That's like an airplane, a commercial airplane crashing every day. AI is going to shine a light on some of those errors. AI, I believe, will shine a light on the learning modalities. So when we look at Nigeria, where a 2-year curriculum in basic math was achieved in 6 weeks, and the girls did just as well as the boys. Is that interesting? Boys usually do better at math. No, that's not about boys. It's about methodology. Boys like things, girls like people. Boys like things, girls like people. If we structure education around that construct, then all of a sudden, we can drive change. It's a tough road. It's a very, very tough road. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
Hi. I'm from Tijuana. I'm a medical doctor, but I studied education
Yes.
and in interdisciplinary doctorate. So I'm doing a PhD, and I really love your talk.
Thank you.
It was really good. I have one question, especially
Okay.
because when I studied in medical school, they didn't stimulate creativity. So they did nothing. So there's just the guides, there are the books, and that's it. The patient has signs, clinical signs, they have symptoms, and that's it. You don't have to be creative. You just have to ask, to do lab work or do studies, and that's it. So when you said, and I'm totally,
Yes.
I'm with this, the things you said about learner centricity
Yes.
and the user's unique creativity frequency, but how do we stimulate creativity when we're, for example, I work with a lot of old doctors and they have a really strict, like you said.
Let them die. Let them
Yes.
die.
But
Move
yes,
on,
yes.
move on. You can't
Yeah.
cling to the past. Okay, those guys are still doing arterial blood gases with a needle in the radial artery.
Yes.
They don't want to use pulse oximetry. Everybody knows pulse oximetry on the finger? They used to have to stick a needle in your artery to do that. It's a struggle for me because it's a transition, right? It's called an adoption sequence. And I believe that they will see how good things are becoming. That's what will drive change. Because when we see outcomes improve, when I can detect an MI before the ST segment is elevated, when I can have an early diagnosis for a cancer at a stage 0, then it becomes a clinical imperative. Today, technology is a clinical option. And the data is going to push that into an imperative. It's a very complicated question. I know I'm giving you the short answer, but thank you for your comments. Medical school is horrible. Medical school is difficult, right? In America, we have a class called neuroanatomy. I don't know if they do it here the same way. 1 month, it's all neuroanatomy, 1 month. So you start, you're a sponge, and you fill up. And at the end, you take the test, and they squeeze it out of you, and there's nothing left. Is this the way we want to teach our doctors? Do we want doctors to have a joy of learning, that moment of discovery in the lab or on the wards, in the OR? That, I think, is different. And also, okay, how about this? 1,6-fructose diphosphate. Do you know what that is? It's in the Krebs cycle. Do you remember the Krebs cycle? How crazy the Krebs cycle. Why do we need to learn the Krebs cycle?
I still don't know.
You don't know, but that's a big deal in medical school, right? That's the tricarboxylic acid cycle. This is the question. I don't have the answer. How do we change, how do we shift the cognitive burden, the cognitive heavy lifting that we impose on physicians in a world where AI offers solutions? That's a really difficult question because, so maybe an AI is telling me that this person's having a heart attack, right? And I can act on that information, and I know what to do, and I can go to cath lab or thrombolytic therapy or oxygen, all those things that it tells me to do. But if that person falls down on the floor and I'm there by myself, I still need how to live through that. It's the lived experience. That's the value of the lived experience. That's why it's so important in medicine that we stay through the night. We watch a patient who goes through a crisis, that we understand the dynamics. But again, that's the cognitive path, remember? And then there's the computational path. And when you pull them together, you have parallax cognition. That's the magic of AI. It's not subordinating one for the other. It's not that doctors will be replaced. And the interesting thing is, and I'm going to finish with one idea here, we often think that doctors are going to go away, or that the circle is getting cut up into smaller and smaller pieces. Whether you're an artist, you're a doctor, you make pizza, whatever it is, right? That's wrong. That's fundamentally incorrect. And all throughout history, it never happened that way. The circle of innovation gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's what's going to happen with medicine, with life. And for example, when Matthew Brady, the photographer of the Civil War in the United States, started taking pictures, what happened to portraiture? What happened to the painter? It grew. It grew. It didn't go away. In fact, we invented something called selfies, a billion-dollar industry that no one saw coming. No one saw coming. What about chess? When Deep Blue, IBM, beat the Russian chess master, what happened? What happened? Did people take their chess pieces, put in their box, and go home? Chess has never been more popular than it is today. The circle of innovation expands, finds new uses, and changes the dynamic of our human existence. 2 minutos más? Sí, okay? It's okay? I can keep talking? Okay? The girl with the pearl earring. Do you know that painting? It's a very famous painting, painted by Vermeer, Dutch master. How did he do that? He took a machine called a camera obscura, reflected the image, and traced it. He used technological augmentation. He used the LLM of his day to create art. Was he cheating? Was that bad? No. We don't know that, but we look the other way. Norman Rockwell, a very, very famous painter in the United States, paints these beautiful pictures of Thanksgiving and a family and a policeman with a young boy who ran away from home. Beautiful, beautiful images. Considered one of the greatest artists in the American art era. He would build a set, take a picture, and use a machine called a Lucy. And he'd enlarge it and stretch it, and then he'd painstakingly trace the entire image. When he signed his name, he didn't sign it like Picasso. He put a stencil and traced it. Norman Rockwell. Look him up. Look at it. You'll see it. And when you go to the Norman Rockwell Museum and you ask, did he use a Lucy? They won't say anything. They look the other way and walk away. What did Norman Rockwell do? He said that the Lucy machine is the worst tool an artist could ever use, and I'd be lost without it. That's medicine today. The LLM is horrible. It's lots of problems. But I think that we would be lost without its computational brilliance. So, okay. ¿Está bien? Thank you all very much.
Muchas gracias. We are deeply grateful to John Nosta for his enthusiastic and outstanding contribution in our Congress. Y vamos a hablar español ahora. Sí. Te entregamos un reconocimiento por tu participación. Muchas gracias.
De nada. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you all. Remember, it's your world. It's your thought. It's your mind. Right? You're the author of your thoughts. Don't give them away. Use a large language model to create them and to drive brilliance. It's genius. It's your genius. Discover the genius within. That's the power of technology. Muchas gracias.
Les agradecemos a cada una y cada uno de ustedes su permanencia en esta conferencia. Tenemos un receso para la comida y las personas que se inscribieron a los talleres, les recordamos que empiezan a las 3 de la tarde, así que optimicen su tiempo disponible. Muchas gracias nuevamente a cada una y cada uno de ustedes.